The whole town burst into laughter when Sarah Mitchell dragged home a rusted World War II airplane wreck, with broken wings and a shattered cockpit. Someone shouted at the diner on Main Street with coffee still steaming, "Rust doesn't fly," but Sarah, a war widow and former Navy mechanic, stayed silent. She felt there was something different about this pile of scrap. While cleaning the cockpit one evening, she pried loose a strange panel. A dusty film reel tumbled out. Sarah's hands trembled as she switched on the projector. Light flickered across the wall, an American pilot dropping relief supplies. And this was only the beginning of a shattering secret. In North Dakota, fog blanketed the vast fields early in the morning, cold wind lashing against the wooden fence. The plane lay there like a worn-out beast, its aluminium skin corroded, wings drooping into the dirt. Sarah pulled on leather gloves and knelt beside the fuselage and scrubbed hard with a steel brush. The screech echoed like claws raking at memory. Every patch of rust that flaked away pulled her back in time, young Sarah in navy blue coveralls. Kneeling on the deck of a Pacific aircraft carrier, sealing a fuel line while anti-aircraft fire shook the sky. She had survived that night, but many comrades hadn't. The explosions, the smoke, the stench of burning fuel still chased her through sleep. Maybe that's why she didn't just see scrap metal when she saw this rusted plane. She saw a chance to heal, but the town didn't understand. A pickup driver stopped by the fence, laughing loudly. "Better scrap it before it falls on your head." Kids circled on bikes, tossing pebbles that pinged off the fuselage. "Mrs. Rusty wins the flight." Carl Boone slapped the table at the diner, where coffee steamed and country music hummed from the radio. Mitchell just bought herself a tombstone with wings. The room roared with laughter. That afternoon, Carl showed up at her yard, his thick jacket stained with oil, gum rolling in his cheek. "Sarah," he said, "I'll buy it back. Double the price. If not, I'll tell the town council you're keeping dangerous junk here. They'll send a truck to haul it off." Sarah lifted her head, eyes sharp as steel. The brush was still in her grip. "No sale." Carl spat his gum on the dirt, sneered, "Suit yourself. When it collapses, don't expect help." For 3 days straight, Sarah did nothing but clean. No engine, no new wings, just a bucket of water, rags, and calloused hands. Her knees ached, her back screamed. But with every patch of rust gone, she breathed easier, as if shedding a layer of darkness. One evening, the kids gathered again. One bold boy hurled a rock, clanging hard against the fuselage. Sarah stepped out, eyes cold as cutting wind. The boys fell silent, then pedaled away fast. When gold bathed the fields at sunset, Sarah sat inside the cracked cockpit, hand resting on the frozen control stick. In the silence, she heard the faint hum of an engine from faraway memory. She closed her eyes, not a pile of junk, a calling. On the 4th day, Sarah was still bent over in the hangar, hair tied messily, jacket smeared with oil. As she scrubbed the instrument panel, a young voice called from the fence, "Are you really going to fix it?" Sarah turned, a skinny boy in a knit cap, hands shoved into his hoodie. His dark eyes burned with curiosity. Theo Ramirez, 14, whose father had died in a trucking accident, leaving behind a boy with a broken dream of flying. At school, kids mocked him. "Wings are for eagles, not orphans." But here his eyes carried only hope. "Can I help?" he asked, hesitating. "I know how to use a wrench." Sarah studied him for a long moment, as if looking at herself the first day she walked into a Navy workshop. She nodded slightly. "All right, but follow orders." From that day, Theo became her shadow. He carried toolboxes, read measurements, and wiped dust off the frame. Adults driving past muttered. Crazy widow got herself a sidekick. On the town's Facebook page, a photo of the two crouched under the wing was posted with the caption, "DIY Titanic." Sarah didn't care. She saw her younger self in Theo's clumsy hands, a kid who once believed planes could talk. One afternoon, Theo pointed at a spot beneath the pilot's seat. "Miss Sarah, this panel, it doesn't look like the others." Sarah scraped away the paint, revealing 4 screws sealed over together. They twisted each one loose. Metal screeched, then bang, the panel dropped hard, nearly crushing Theo's foot. He jumped back and Sarah yanked him clear. Inside was a leather tube bound with frayed silver cloth. Sarah's hands trembled as she unrolled it. An old blueprint spread across the table, shortened landing gear, special flaps at the top in faded ink, stall prototype Project Nightingale. Theo held his breath. Nightingale like the bird. Sarah nodded. A pang in her chest. The film reel from the other night flashed in her mind. A young pilot with the call sign Lark, dropping aid over Normandy. Sarah pulled down a white sheet that evening and flicked on the projector. Flickering light revealed grainy frames, an American pilot, face smeared with dirt, dropping crates of medicine to exhausted soldiers. A brief caption flickered, "Nightingale only carries life." Theo turned, whispering, "Miss Sarah, this wasn't built to fight. This was built to save." Sarah sat in silence. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, but inside the hangar, 2 people and 1 rusted plane now shared the same secret, one powerful enough to change everything. Spring rolled into North Dakota, snow melting to reveal soggy mud. Sarah and Theo bent low under the plane's belly in the hangar, replacing each rusted cable with new steel wire. A bolt snapped with a sharp crack and Sarah frowned. "We need a 44 landing gear," she sighed, but that kind was nearly extinct. While Sarah struggled with each detail, Carl Boone spread poison. At the diner, he stood in the middle of the room, voice booming. "Mitchell's scamming everyone. She's taking donations to fix that corpse and then she'll run off with the money." Whispers rippled across tables. People glanced at one another, suspicious. Sarah sat in the corner, coffee cup trembling in her hand. But she rose, faced him. Her voice was low and steady. I haven't taken a single cent from anyone. If you doubt me, come to the hangar and see. The diner went dead silent. Carl clenched his jaw and curled his lip but said nothing. That afternoon when Sarah returned, someone was waiting outside the hangar. It was Mabel, the diner's owner, silver hair tied neatly, an old envelope in her hand. Someone asked me to pass this along. They don't want their name known. Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a dust-covered cassette tape. She and Theo dug up an old player and slid it in. Static crackled, then broke into a deep, hoarse male voice. If one day the world is buried in white, bring her out. Nightingale was never meant to die in darkness. We once saved hundreds of lives. Don't let the promise rot in rust. Sarah froze. Theo whispered, did you hear that? He saved hundreds of people. The voice from the cassette seemed to echo out of the past, cutting through dust, through the howl of the wind outside. Sarah sank into a chair, eyes blurred. It wasn't just the voice of a pilot. It was a legacy handing her its weight. Outside, pickups still rumbled by, people still muttered. But inside, two small figures in one rusted plane had heard a call louder than any mockery. One stormy night, Sarah sat dazed in the hangar, her fingers trembling as they probed every corner of the cockpit. Her flashlight cast a dim yellow glow. Suddenly, she brushed against a small gap in the floor. A tap made a hollow sound. She pried up the panel and pulled out a thick metal box, green with dust and moss. Inside, oiled cloth wrapped something tight. When Sarah opened it, her eyes widened. In front of her lay a folder stamped in faded red, Project Nightingale classified. She spread the papers on the table. The blueprints were precise: booster flaps, shortened landing gear, and a body lighter than standard. Notes read, short takeoff and landing designed for medical missions. A black and white photo showed American soldiers bandaging wounds in a trench as a Nightingale dropped medicine from the sky. No bombs, only aid. At the back was a small envelope, handwriting clear and firm. To the keeper, if you find this, remember Nightingale was not built to kill. She only carries life. Someday when snow buries every road, someone will need her. Bring her out. Lt. Mason Lark Hale. Sarah read it over and over, that name, Lark Hale. Curious, she opened her old laptop and searched veteran records. Only a few short lines. Pilot missing in action, 1945. Normandy, no grave, no memorial, a forgotten hero. Exhaustion crushed her shoulders. A week of labor had left her hands raw, back aching, eyes red with sleepless nights. Sarah momentarily dropped her head onto the table, whispering, maybe Carl's right, maybe I can't. The flashlight beam fell across the letter. The words "don't let her sleep" blurred through tears, but still glowed. Sarah drew a sharp breath and sat upright. Wind whistled through the cracks of the wooden hangar like the ghost of an engine roaring back to life. The next morning, Sarah walked in with dark circles under her eyes but a steel-hard gaze. Theo was already waiting, grinning with a toolbox in his arms. What are we doing first today? Sarah touched the cold aluminum frame and softly answered, today we're not fixing scrap, today we're carrying on a legacy. Theo nodded, tightened a cable, and began humming the national anthem. Sarah chuckled. Why the anthem? The boy flushed. So Nightingale remembers she belongs to America. The smell of grease mixed with a boy's shaky tune in that little hangar. Sarah realized this was no longer her personal project. It was a promise renewed, a legacy rising above pain, bigger than herself. The north wind blew fiercely, gray clouds piling thick. The town radio announced, blizzard warning across the Rockies. Silver Creek is cut off. Highways frozen. The town hospital is out of insulin. Antibiotics will only last one more day. The announcer's voice cracked. Without supplies, many won't make it. Sarah stood frozen before the hangar, gloved hands clenched tight. Inside, Nightingale gleamed brighter than ever but remained a massive gamble. The engine had only been test-fired, the landing gear just installed. A real flight that was a wager with lives at stake. That afternoon, a pickup with the Mountain Mercy Air logo skidded into the yard. Two workers climbed out, jackets crusted with snow, faces drawn with exhaustion. The man spoke first. We saw the boy's video. That Nightingale, can she fly? Silver Creek needs medicine now. Sarah swallowed hard. She's not ready. We haven't tested her fully. The woman with him laid a hand on Sarah's shoulder, eyes pleading. We're out of options. Helicopters can't land. Those people, this is their only hope. Before Sarah could answer, a mocking laugh rang out. Carl Boone, thick jacket pulled tight, leaned on the fence. Don't be stupid. That hunk of junk isn't flying anywhere. Put lives on her. And you'll kill the whole town. Sarah faced him, eyes burning in the fading light. You're just afraid to see her take off. Carl shrugged, feigning ease. I've got the original landing gear. Without it, that plane's nothing but an aluminum coffin. A small crowd gathered, wind howling around them. Theo clutched Sarah's sleeve, voice shaking. Miss Sarah, what do we do? Sarah drew a deep breath. The old letter echoed in her mind. When the world is buried in white, bring her out. Outside. Snow already smothered the roads. This was the day. She turned to Theo, eyes hard as steel. We're going to fly. Nightingale was born for this. Theo swallowed but nodded fiercely. If you dare, I'll dare too. At that moment, the wind across the plains no longer sounded like a threat but like a call from the past. Sarah laid her hand on the cold aluminum skin. This was no longer an old plane. This was the last chance to keep a promise. The next day, the whole town came. Rumors of Silver Creek's crisis had spread everywhere. People huddled in thick coats, breath steaming in the icy air, murmuring, if that old plane really takes off, it'll be a miracle. Under pressure, Carl Boone finally produced the landing gear. He dropped the wooden crate at the hangar door, his face grim. Take it, but when she crashes, don't say I didn't warn you. Sarah and Theo said nothing. Together they tightened each bolt, greased the joints, and fixed the wheels into place. When they lowered the frame, Nightingale swayed, then settled firmly on her feet. Theo whispered in awe, she's standing again. That night, under the weak glow of flashlights, Sarah slid into the pilot's seat. Theo sat beside her, checklist in hand. Outside, townsfolk pressed in close, their frosty breath clouding the dark. Fuel line checked, propeller clear, battery connected. Sarah turned the key, a cough, then a roar. The engine roared to life, rattling the steel frame. Cheers erupted from the crowd. Theo shouted, she's alive. Sarah smiled, heart trembling with hope. But before she could savor it, a spark flashed from the panel. A sharp snap, smoke spilling out, the stench of burning wires filling the cockpit. Sarah killed the power instantly. The engine died. Silence crashed heavily over the hangar. A man in the crowd shook his head. Told you she'll never fly. Carl smirked and walked away. Theo stared at Sarah, voice breaking. We failed, didn't we? Sarah leaned back in the seat, eyes blurring. In a rush, memory slammed her. The night on a carrier deck. Engines ablaze, black smoke, comrades screaming. Her chest tightened, fear crushing every spark of hope. Then from the old tape deck, the cassette clicked and played. Static hissed, then the voice of Lark Hale. Bring her. Nightingale wasn't built to sleep. Bring her. Sarah closed her eyes, exhaled hard. Her hand pressed the control stick again, steady this time. No, she whispered. We're not done. We'll strip all the wiring, rebuild it. She's not dead. Theo lifted his head, eyes blazing. Then I'm with you. Outside, the north wind wailed over the white plains, but inside the hangar, a promise from the past had just caught fire again. The storm raged, wind screaming through every crack in the boards. The phone in the hangar rang nonstop. A Silver Creek doctor pleaded, trembling. We only have a few vials of insulin left. If we don't get supplies tonight, people won't survive. Sarah drew a deep breath, tightening the strap of her old flight jacket. Theo stood beside her, clutching the checklist, pale-faced but eyes burning bright. Ready, co-pilot? Sarah asked. Always, he answered, voice shaky but firm. Nightingale thundered, the fuselage shuddering as if it might rip apart. Sarah pushed the throttle, wheels grinding over the frozen ground. The whole town held its breath, one hard bounce. Then the plane lifted free. For the first time in nearly 8 decades, Nightingale flew again. Wind-battered, snow-blinded, Sarah gripped the stick with iron hands. Theo read aloud, altitude steady, fuel at half, package secure. His voice trembled but stayed steady. Below, Silver Creek lay in darkness. On the hospital roof, a few figures waved weak flashlights. Sarah opened the drop bay, a crate burst free, parachute blooming, landing on the roof. A nurse ran out, clutched it tight, lifted her face and sobbed. The second drop hit the fire station. The third, a snow-buried cabin. Sarah glimpsed through the window, a small arm reaching to catch the bundle. Her chest ached. This wasn't just flying, it was carrying life, but the fuel gauge plummeted. A red light blinked, alarms blared. We're almost out, Theo shouted, voice cracking. Sarah remembered the night of war, when engines smoked and she kept her crew alive. She whispered, trust Nightingale. She pulled the stick. Dropping toward a stretch of highway the firefighters had cleared of snow. Wheels skidded hard, the plane jolted and shook. Theo squeezed his eyes shut, then clunk, the tires bit, and Nightingale rolled to a stop intact. Cheers exploded from the fire trucks. A firefighter pulled off his helmet, clapped slowly, then yelled, not a rust bucket, she's a miracle. Theo broke down in tears, clutching the checklist. Sarah leaned on the stick, tears streaking her face. In the freezing wind, she whispered, we kept your promise, Lark. News spread faster than the storm. The local paper blared, rusty WW2 plane saves Silver Creek. TV screens showed Nightingale landing on the icy strip, calling it the miracle in aluminum. No one lifted their head when Sarah walked in at the diner, where mocking laughter once echoed. Mabel poured coffee, set it before her, and whispered, you made us proud. Carl Boone sat silent in the corner, hands clasped. As Sarah passed, he muttered, I was wrong. She nodded, no words needed. In the hangar, Nightingale gleamed under fresh polish, aluminium skin reflecting like a mirror. On the wall, Sarah hung a small bronze plaque. For LT Mason Lark Hale, Nightingale still carries life. People began to gather and help. A group of engineering students brought tools, eager to learn each detail. A veteran left behind a pair of old flight gloves with a note. She deserves the sky again. An anonymous envelope arrived with the words, thank you for keeping her alive. Theo was no longer just a helper. Sarah taught him how to read blueprints, check cables, and even adjust the throttle. To him, Nightingale was the dream his father had never lived to see. Mountain Mercy Air sent representatives. We want to launch the Angel Bird Initiative, they said. Old planes restored for rescue, and we want you to lead. Sarah stood still, then smiled, not for glory, but because the legacy was flying farther. A small ceremony filled the hangar. Townsfolk, students, and veterans gathered. On the screen, a photo of Lark Hale beside Nightingale in 1945. An old man broke down, voice shaking, that was my brother. Silence swept the room, no laughter, no mockery, only respect. At dawn, golden light spilt across snowy fields. Sarah pulled on her gloves and stepped into the hangar. Theo was already waiting, checklist in arms. You're not taking a day off, he teased. Sarah laid her hand on the cold aluminium. Smiling, this bird doesn't get to sleep anymore. Outside, the wind howled past the fence, carrying the scent of earth and hope. Nightingale was no longer a joke. She was a symbol that in America, even rust can shine again.